Hi, welcome, and thank you very much for joining our webinar. I'm Paul Rouse, the Flexible Fund Manager, and I'm going to be talking about the Pathfinders competition. During this conversation, I'll tell you a little bit about the Hub and what we're up to, and focus most of my conversation with you on the competition. What is Pathfinders? How do I apply? What's the scope for the call? What happens to my proposal? And those sorts of things. And then I'll tie up with some points on what happens to grants once you've been funded if you're successful. So, a few brief words about the Hub, the Greenhouse Gas Removal Hub, we're known as CORE. Now, we were funded by UKRI, and we conduct research exploring different approaches to GGR to try and establish what would be an economically and socially and environmentally scalable set of options to deliver greenhouse gas removal. The removals that we need if we're going to reach 1.5 degrees. In addition to our research work, we coordinate 5 demonstration projects that are being funded by UKRI and sit alongside the Hub. And those projects are looking at peatlands, perennial biomass crops, treescapes, enhanced weathering and biochar. Now the Hub is hosted in 7 institutions, you can see those on the slide, and the demonstrators are hosted at other institutions. Now, there's lots more information about this on our website, and I'm sure you can explore it in your own leisure, and hopefully you'll find it useful. So, the Flexible Fund. Well, we have £1 million available to help the Hub support innovation, knowledge exchange, and engagement. And we've divided this up, as you can see on the slide, allocating £600,000 to innovation. Now that, in effect, is the Pathfinders competition. This is early stage ideas, proof of concept type ideas that we want to support. The other funding for capacity building, for example, we're supporting some secondments, and I'll say a few words about that right at the end of this webinar. And we'll be doing work on engagement as well. But I'm focusing now on the Pathfinders competition. So what is this mechanism? Well, we want to pump prime early stage innovations which have the potential for really high impact. So we want to be open to proposals from a whole range of types of organisation and people. We want to be open to new, radical and exciting ideas. Without those, it's going to be very difficult for us to develop a portfolio of GGR that will secure us the removals that we will need in the future. In terms of competitions, we had one Pathfinders competition last year, and you can see the projects that we funded on the website. On this page, if you scroll down, you'll see a link. And you might find it useful to read up about those projects to get a sense of the sorts of things that we're interested in funding. We have this competition this year, and then we'll have a third next year, which we're likely to announce in December. The topic for that will be confirmed later in the year, or rather next year, I should say. We're open to receive applications from, in effect, any constituted organisation in the UK. So this is not just for academic researchers. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. For each round of the competition, we're allocating £200,000. So a third of our pot. Now, scope. What do we want to fund? Well, firstly, and the most important thing in many ways, is to say we're funding greenhouse gas removals. So we're talking about removing atmospheric greenhouse gases that have already been emitted, were historically emitted. What we're not interested in doing is capturing emissions at the point of source. So, for example, we don't want to fund research that would be looking at removing CO2 from a smokestack, but we would be interested in removing greenhouse gases or CO2 that was emitted from a smokestack, say, 100 years ago. So we're, in effect, working to try and tidy up the mess rather than trying to stop more of a mess being made. The projects we'll fund will be proof of concept type projects. For those who know the TRL kind of language, we're looking at TRL levels 0 to 2. Now, don't worry if you don't know about TRLs. There's information about that in the guidelines for applicants. with links to a lot of useful information to help describe what those things mean. What we really hope is what we fund through this scheme will grow and flourish. We'll be able to secure funding from other sources, having demonstrated with our funding that the idea is actually realisable, that it could work. Now, our preference is to fund projects that have the capacity to give us collateral value, we're calling it, but other benefits. This isn't a requirement, but if you have an idea that will not only help remove greenhouse gases and sequester them, but an idea that would also address perhaps waste issues, heat or water waste, or, for example, one of our Pathfinder projects funded last year uses marine plastic waste in its process. If you were to do something like that, we'd be very keen. And if you might have something that would generate new products or new services, again, that would be very interesting. Now, this is not in any way a requirement at all, but it's simply something that would be good to see. We don't mind if you want to apply for an element of a removal method. So if you're looking at how to resolve or improve sequestration rather than a full chain method of greenhouse gas removal, that's absolutely fine. What would be useful, though, is if you're doing a study on a small element or part of a removal method, it would be useful if you were to demonstrate to us how there is a pathway towards the removal and sequestration of the greenhouse gas in perpetuity, or at least in climate relevant timescales. You don't have to show how you will do that, but tell us how your work will be situated in a full chain process that would deliver those kind of outcomes. I mentioned that we're open. That means we're open to all types of disciplines. You might have multiple disciplines involved in your project, or none, or one rather. You might also have multiple organisations involved in your proposal. All of that is fine. We want to be open. So now let's turn to the two foci for this call for proposals. As you know, this is a call for proposals for GGR work on oceans or on methane. These two came out of an ideation process that we had earlier in the year, where we brought together experts from the research and business communities and policymakers as well, to explore where there were gaps, where there were missed opportunities in the UK portfolio of GGR activity. And oceans and methane as gaps came out of that. So that's our focus. Now, if you're interested in oceans, we're willing to accept or keen to accept proposals that explore any approach to ocean removal. So you'll see on this slide a list of ideas, the sorts of things that go on in ocean removal. This is not an inclusive list. This is not what you must apply for. Simply some ideas of the types of removals approach that you might want to explore with us for funding. If you've got another idea, or a better idea, or a different idea, that's great, and we'd be really keen to see it. So then moving on to methane. With methane, we're interested in methane removal from the atmosphere, but also methane destruction within the atmosphere in situ. Now, clearly that isn't exactly greenhouse gas removal, in that methane destruction would normally leave carbon dioxide as a waste product, if you will, from the destruction, and that too is a greenhouse gas. But of course, the warming potential of methane is much higher than carbon dioxide, so methane destruction would lead to a net reduction in warming capacity or potential. There's a few examples here, again, about methane removal techniques that you might like to consider. And again, we're very well open to receiving other types of proposal on other approaches to methane removal. So that's the scope. I'm going to say a little bit now about eligibility and the funding that's available. So as I mentioned, it's open to all. So if you're in a UK university, we'd love to see a proposal. If you're an independent research group, that would be very good too. Industry, startups, businesses, NGOs, public sectors, you are all eligible to apply to us. When you apply, if there is more than one organisation involved in your project, that's great. As long as that's what's needed to deliver the project, we welcome it. But you should be aware that we'll only issue one award. That'll go to the principal investigator's home institution. So if you do have collaborative partners, before we issue a grant, if you're successful in this process, we would ask you to produce a collaboration agreement. Now that needs to be produced before we issue an award. It isn't required before you apply. But because this is public money, it's the public purse, it's a precious thing, we must protect it. Because of that, we will want to make sure that we're clear how the funds will be dispersed amongst other partners. And that would be in your collaboration agreement. If you're a part-time worker and you would like to apply for this, you can have a part-time project. So normally they're 12 months long, but if, for example, you were a 50% time person, then we would give you a 24-month-long grant. So don't be perturbed and don't feel as if part-time workers aren't welcome. They very much are. The value of the awards, £50,000. We operate under the dual support system. Those in universities will know this well. So we're offering the UKRI recognised bodies £50,000 at full economic cost. So that's the 80% value. If you're not in that group, then we'll be offering 100% of 50,000. All this means is that you will receive £50,000, whatever situation you're in, but it will be accounted for in different ways. So don't get in a pickle about this. Information, again, about this in the guidelines. Hopefully it's clear. And feel free to get in touch with us to ask any questions that you may have about it. And the last point about eligibility and funding, we're very, very keen to have new researchers applying to this competition. We need to grow the cohort of people working in this field. We need more researchers, more innovators involved in GGR. And because of that, we want to encourage new people to come into this. So if you're new into the research world, if you're new into greenhouse gas removal, please consider applying. Now, we know some universities aren't very keen on new researchers applying. If you want to apply and you feel that you might come across those kind of issues in your institution, feel free to get in touch with us and we'll try and encourage your institution to support your proposal. So moving on, completing your application. Firstly, we ask you, please do read the guidelines very carefully. They're detailed, and I hope they're very comprehensive. There's a lot of information in here that will help you write the best proposal you can. Not least the assessment criteria are set out, they're described. When we put these to our review panel, they'll be using the same criteria. So in your application, if you describe to us how you'll meet each of those assessment criteria, tell us what you're doing, then you'll have a much stronger chance of being successful. So read those carefully. It would be helpful if you could be realistic about your start dates as well. We're going to announce the outcomes in March. Please don't ask for a 1st of April start date. That would not be very helpful. It's not only April Fool's Day, it would be foolish. So think through how much time you might need to get the project ready, to get it up and running. You might need to recruit people, for example. You may need to order some kit. All of these things take time. So think that through and put some lead time into your project. In the form, you're asked to justify your costs. There's a section, justification for resources. Treat this with care. I've mentioned this as the public purse. We need to know what it is that you're asking for and why. So you need to disaggregate your costs, explain the unit costs of items that you're asking for, and explain to us why you need them. This is going to help a lot when it comes to issuing grants. It'll make life much more easy. If you don't explain the costs, I'm afraid we won't be able to give you the money that you need. And that's going to turn to the case for support. So this is up to 6 slides long. There's information in the guidelines about things like font size and margin size and so on. This is the most important part of your application. This is the bit where you get to tell us why we should fund your project. Why is it exciting? Why is it important? Why will it make a difference? You need a compelling case, so spend time on this, think it through. There are 10 weeks from the announcement of this competition to the closing date. Try and use that time. And then we'll talk about EDI, quality, diversity and inclusiveness. This is important as well. In the same way I was talking about new researchers, if we're going to have the strongest, best community of workers involved in greenhouse gas removal, we have to be open to the widest possible number of people. Now, to help us do that, we need to track information about who's hearing about us and who's applying. So please do complete our EDI form when you submit your application. This is a separate form. There's a link to the form in the guidelines. That's submitted to other people. We won't see it, those of us who are assessing the proposals. It's entirely in confidence. So you shouldn't feel that there's any risk of any information being disclosed or it being in any way related to the decision-making process. So please do fill that form. So once your application's in, we'll have a look, make sure it's eligible, and then we'll have a panel meeting, a panel of independent experts. Nobody from the hub will be on the panel. I'll be the secretary to the panel only. That panel will review the applications and make funding recommendations, a priority list. That priority list then goes to our hub management board, who are asked to approve the priority list. Having gone through that process, we'll then write to the principal investigator, and we expect to do this by the 31st of March. That letter will give you news about whether you're successful or not. If you are, well done. If not, try again another time, I suppose. Accompanying the decision letter will be some anonymized comments from our panel members. Now, if you are unsuccessful, hopefully that information will be useful. It might give you some insights into how to strengthen your next application or to improve your idea. Once we've written to you and let you know we'd like to give you an award, assuming you do want to accept the award, then Oxford University, who hold the grant on behalf of the hub, will issue the award to you. Within that award, it will be very clear that the IP remains with the awardees. Now, we will ask to license some IP for reporting purposes. We need to be able to report to UKRI about what we're funding, but also for academic and teaching purposes as well. Again, read the guidelines. There's more information about IP and how we treat it in those. And it'll also be clearly specified in the grant letter when you get it. And our payments will be paying quarterly in arrears. Now, the last section, I think, reporting and participation. We want our Pathfinder projects to become sort of members of our family, part of the team working in the hub and in the demonstrator programs. So we will ask you to participate. We would like you to come along to our events occasionally and present, tell us what you're doing, tell us about your findings. We'd also like you to engage with the hub's evaluation framework team. This group is establishing a framework for assessment of GGR techniques to help inform decision-making about adoption of techniques. So we'd be very grateful for the award holders to participate in that. This won't be an onerous task, it'll be a few days during the year, and we'll give you a little bit of extra money to make this possible by paying travel and assistance and those kind of things. We'll ask you to produce a case study slide, just a description on a PowerPoint slide, with images and so on to give us some material we can use to share with the wider community in our communications and so on. And in terms of reporting, we'll have a quarterly conversation just to make sure things are on track, and if they're not, explore how we can resolve those. And then we'll ask you to produce an end of award report. Once again, information about all of these things is provided in the guidelines, so you can explore those in more depth. So that's all I'm going to say about the Pathfinders. Next steps, what would I suggest you do? Read the guidelines carefully. Keep going on about it, but I think it's important. Talk to your institution and secure their support. We'll need their sign-off on the proposal to say that they would accept an award if we were to issue or offer one. So talk to them at an early stage, get them on board, talk to your other partners, and get cracking on your case for support to your proposal. The closing date is noon on the 23rd of February, and it's important that you meet that deadline. If proposals come in after the 23rd of February, afternoon on the 23rd of February, then we will reject them. And that's simply so that everybody has the same amount of time to prepare their application. I mentioned there'll be another round of competition for Pathfinders next year. That'll be announced probably in November time. It'll be on a different set of agenda, and we'll be holding workshops and sandpits to help us develop the agenda for that call for proposals. So perhaps keep an eye out for those if you might be interested in joining us in scoping out the future for GGR. So that's what I'm going to say about Pathfinders. I mentioned a secondment scheme. Here's a quick slide about removals in residence. That's what we've called it. We're funding 12-month-long secondments. Anybody can apply from any organisation to work on any aspect of GGR. So lots of information about that on the same page as this webinar. So have a look at that if you're interested. And with that, I'm going to come to an end and say thank you very much for watching. We really hope you want to apply for Pathfinders. We look forward to receiving your applications. In the meantime, connect up with us, look at our social media streams and sign up for our newsletter. So thank you very much.